Welcome all. Today I'd like to talk about gimbals and gimbals, or a gimbal specifically for the Blackmagic Pocket 4K 6K camera. For those of you who've looked at my previous videos, you're aware that I've been sort of trying to experiment with different devices that allows me to do some better stable video than just hand holding the camera on its own as you see it now. But pondering the situation of what I've been doing in the past and what I want to do in the future, I can't get around the fact that I do need a gimbal, and it's the only way that I'm going to get steady footage and consistently steady footage if I want to use the camera as it is. So to that end, I started doing a bit of research as to what might be the ideal camera for what I need, or the ideal gimbal for what I need. And as it turns out, the Crane 2S came out recently, and all the internet celebrities went agog with that, their new favourite gimbal, etc, etc. But after watching a number of videos on it, I sort of came to the conclusion that it's not going to suit. None of them have tried it out with a setup like mine. They're using generally a bit of a lighter setup, smaller lenses and so forth. And so I gave that a miss, and not long after that DJI came out with their new gimbals. And once again, all the celebrities were agog with their new favourite gimbal, but the same situation. I don't think anyone presented a good solid case that this particular camera, or my setup with this weight and so forth, with the Blackmagic Pocket 4K, would really work with those gimbals. So I started my search again, and ended up falling back onto an old favourite, which is the Fayutech gimbals. I've got two of them, one which is about 3 years old, the A2000, and a more recent one, the AK2000. This is fine for mobile phone use and so on, and this is quite good for my EM1. It's quite easy to set up, and it works reasonably well, but neither are ideal for a heavy camera and a big boxy camera like the 4K is. But Fayutech also make an AK4500, which is a gimbal that takes 4.6 kilos. And after watching a few videos on that, I ended up biting the bullet, and that's what I bought. Unfortunately, it went back the next day. It had some real problems. I think it was defective after some consideration once I had sent it back. Certainly the hyperlink controller wouldn't charge, so I couldn't use that. And the gimbal itself, I could balance the camera really nicely. It would work for one moment. I'd turn the gimbal off and then back on again, and it'd start vibrating badly. Turn it off, turn it on again, and this time it'd start flopping around. And this happened all the time. It was just no consistency to it. I thought that it could be the problem with the camera itself, but then in hindsight, I started thinking about it and saying, well, if I could balance it once and it worked for a while, it should work all the time. It had the latest firmware and everything else, but it didn't work, so that was a bust. So I was back to square one. Then that meant more videos and more internet searching, and I came across a number of videos where people had actually bought a particular gimbal and were managing to get their Pocket 4 or 6Ks balanced to a reasonable degree. Some had issues and so forth, but they also had some solutions that seemed to work. And to that end, I decided to go with one of those gimbals, and that one turns out to be the Zhiyun Crane 2S, 3S I should say. A rather hefty, robust gimbal. It was somewhat more than what I initially intended to get. This is the Pro Kit, but when I was able to get it for about $800 less than what retail stores in Australia were selling it for, I couldn't overlook it. Basically it was the only option for a couple of reasons. I wanted the two motors because I wanted to focus and zoom control, focus control especially. Zoom wasn't that essential, but it was there. And I needed the power pack because all indications were that with the camera weighing over 3 kilos, you needed the power pack to run it because it just wasn't otherwise suitable for it. And because I've also got a Arca Swiss plate on here, which adds several more 100 kilogram or grams, not kilograms, to the weight of the gimbal, plus the motors, I'd be sort of straining it without that. So when I looked at the cheapest option for this, once you buy the motors and the power pack separate, you're virtually up to the same price as what I paid anyway. So I got a really good deal on this, so I can't complain about that. But before I go into showing you how successful or not I was with balancing the camera, I want to show something that I think a lot of people overlook, and I think is important for balancing a Pocket 4K 6K on any gimbal. Doesn't matter what it is, it doesn't matter what your configuration is. Mine is probably at the extreme end of the weight limits and the style of setup that I've got, but I think there's something important that can be demonstrated. If you have a look, the centre of gravity there is just about there. It's almost level, and it's not quite level because I've got a 100 gram glass filter in there. If I took that off, this thing would sit perfectly parallel, and it sits ideally like that. So this is now where the centre of gravity of this camera is, and it's actually balanced quite well at that particular point. But there's another issue that where my camera is a little bit different to most others. First off, as you've seen before, I run an Arca Swiss plate from the back of the camera to the front of the lens, and attached to the end of oops, I've had a battery failure. I'll be back in a tick. Nothing ever goes right the first time. This is my third attempt at this. The first attempt, which visually and story-wise was perfect. Everything was out of focus for some reason, so I had to redo it, and then batteries ran out on the transmitter that I'm using, so start again. And now my little side light went out. Probably not all that important, but nonetheless. Anyway, back to the camera. As I said, I've got an Arca Swiss plate with a Y bracket on there that holds the lens in, but in addition to that, I've got some zip ties that actually hold the lens to the Y plate, so it doesn't move at all, and so that means that it's absolutely locked in with the rest of the rig and the camera. There's no movement anywhere in that whole system. What I see a lot of people doing with the Pocket 4K and the 6K is they attach a lens, sometimes without any front end lens support, even with a lighter lens, or some who use a Y bracket don't have anything on top like my zip ties. Now this lens is a zoom, it's not going to change. I'm going to keep it on there permanently, so I don't care about the zip ties being there, but what it does is it just makes this one system into a solid block. When you see the celebrities doing their rig tests, gimbal tests, they use cinema cameras, and most of them have a PL mount lens, which is a positive lock mount lens, and that locks this lens into the camera really solidly, so there's no movement. So the whole system is very, very solid, and I think that is one of the prime principles to getting a gimbal to balance properly, is to make sure that your camera itself has nothing that can jiggle and vibrate around if some sort of movement occurs within the gimbal itself, so, or in the situation when you're moving about. So that's important. So there's establishing that centre of gravity, and then there's that rigidity. Now I'll put my microphone back on, because with that the centre of gravity does change a little bit. It just leans off to the side fractionally, but I'll show you what the effect is on the gimbal itself. Now, one of the things is, as you can see, I've got the motors mounted on permanently, and with the Arca Swiss plate on there, I can just drop the camera into place, and I should ideally be doing this while I'm standing up so I can see where the things are. But what I do is I align the motors, and that's now roughly balanced. I'll move that so I can see my ugly scone. So it's not perfectly balanced, and it doesn't have to be. What you do see is where the motor is on there for the pitch, it's lined up almost perfectly with where that cord was holding up that at the base of the monitor itself. So that's lined up there, and the same with the roll motor. It's lined up almost perfectly with that same point. Not with this axis of the lens, because that's not where the balance point is. It's off to the right. So that is now sort of not perfect, and it doesn't have to be, because when I turn this thing on, and it went on, yep, there we go, it's there, and there's no vibrations or anything else. Now I'll pick it up to show you that it does sort of work in all positions, and that's one of the things with this current setup, the way it's designed. It's an absolute pig to pick up and put down, because there's just virtually nothing really ideally to grab hold of when you're wanting to lift it up, and because it is a very heavy combination. The 8 kilos or so that this weighs, or just under 8 kilos as it is at the moment, is not a hefty weight in my view. If it was a dumbbell, it'd be quite easy to lift up and move around, because you've just got 2 weights at each end and a central handle. What makes this different is that you've got a lot of weight separated by that distance. So the moment arm that occurs when you lift it up actually increases the weight at the front considerably. So you're really picking up effectively a much heavier weight, just in the pick-up stage especially, before you've got anywhere to grip. So it's a real bugger to pick it up, and so there's no ideal solution for it at the moment. I'm working on it. I might come up with something, and hopefully I will. Adding the extension arm to it makes no difference. It is not in any way making it easy to lift up or put down, because of the angle that's going on here, and where you've got to sort of hold it. If you're sort of putting it up somewhere high, yeah, fine, but once you've got to go low, or if you go to the ground, it's a pain. But anyway, as you can see, it works fine. There's no vibrations or anything else. You can go, and what have I got? Got it in. Oh, I've got it turned off, that's why it's like that. Yep, now it's on. Right, that's one of the things. The controls on this are still something I'm getting used to. I'm always inadvertently pushing the wrong thing, or getting some other control coming up that I don't want. I'm too used to the Tech controls, which are just an on-screen touch type style, and with simply a scroll wheel or a moving wheel. But that's just something I've got to learn. Anyway, as you can see, there's no vibrations when it's up in the vertical mode, and nothing at all down in that mode either. Don't worry about the road thing vibrating. That's just the actual mount itself doing a bit of vibration. But it works well. The reason that I had that glass, if I didn't mention it already, is that with the lens being front heavy, you can push the camera back further, and you properly clear the I can't tilt that thing down to show you now, but the back of the camera comes further out, and allows you to push the camera closer to the arm itself. Most people that I've seen on YouTube, they pull the base plate out as far as it goes, so they can mount the body of the camera close to the pitch arm or pitch motor. And I don't have to do that. I think mine is out maybe halfway, if that. And again, I think that aids to the balancing of it, because you're not putting stuff out. Again, it's lined up with the roll motor and the pitch motor, and that's the important factor for balancing. So this works really well, and I haven't had any real drama with it. I did a short video the day after I got this, and let me put that down, and I'll play that next, just so you can see exactly how it works. And don't be too sort of critical of it, because I took my hound to a local park. I was wearing gumboots there while I was walking, so I wasn't trying to do any ninja walking or anything like that, if it's even possible in gumboots. And going up some rough hills there and coming down again. So I was carrying this in underslung mode for about 25 minutes or so, videoing it. And the video is only about 1.25 minutes. But it shows you this thing in action. It's not perfect, because you still get that bobbing up and down that you can invariably not avoid unless you get specialist rigs that take that particular vertical movement out of it. But overall, I think it's actually not too bad. So have a look at that, and then I'll talk about a few other things with the gimbal once that's over. Okay, so that's the video. Nothing flash, but I think it gives a reasonable indication of how this gimbal will work. There were no vibrations or anything like that going on. From the general perspective, it actually works quite well, and I'm very pleased with it. So after 25 minutes, it did start to get a bit weighty, and I'm looking at a couple of options to hopefully resolve that problem without having to go to big issues or big carry sort of systems. I've got an easy rig that I could use with this, but I don't particularly want to do that because it's not very inconspicuous when you're at events and so on. You're looking like a Ghostbuster or whatever as you wander about. I'm not self-conscious about it, but a lot of people become self-conscious when they see somebody like that near them and filming them and all the rest. This setup is not exactly inconspicuous, but it's not as bad as wandering around with an easy rig that's got the arm over your head and all that sort of stuff. You do tend to stand out from a great distance. So the option that I have, and I've looked into it, and Zhiyun make a belt with a sort of a little holder which takes the extension arm, I think, and connects to it, and it sort of takes the weight of the gimbal partly off your arms so that you can rest it down on your hips and you can still get all the movement and everything else. The problem is that it's not available at the moment. Amazon lists it as available in January or something. Same thing eBay, it's really late, so I'm going to hold off until the new year unless I can find one somewhere that's actually closer by. But that looks like a reasonable solution to carrying this thing around without having to go the full easy rig route and so on like others do, or the vest with the spring arm and so on. Just don't want to go to that extent because I'm not going to use this gimbal that much that'll justify that. I don't do music videos and things like that, so it's not really necessary. The other thing I'm looking at, and I've ordered an adapter, a collar that goes onto the bottom of the yaw arm, in the hope that I can put a little handle onto the side of the gimbal attached to that collar and make it a bit easier to pick up and put down this gimbal. A bit like what this is. That sort of enables you to hold the gimbal a bit easier and you can pick it up and lift it down. So much lighter weight, but I'm hoping to sort of emulate that with this gimbal and see if that works. If it works, I'll do a follow-up video showing what it does. Now, another thing about reasons why I went for the Crane 3S was that it uses 18650 batteries. The likes of the DJI and the Moser gimbals all use a proprietary handle with the batteries built in. You can't remove them. And the problem that I had with the Feiyutech Magic Wand was that it has an 18650 battery inside, which wasn't charging, but there was no way to replace it. So that thing was useless. And I don't want that, because if for any reason a battery fails, whatever, Murphy's always waiting around a corner. It's easy to change an 18650 battery. I've got plenty of them. These units use them. I've got them other in battery packs and so on. So, and the thing is that, like the handles in the DJI, they all use 18650 batteries. Why not make them replaceable, user replaceable, rather than having them locked in? So that was one of the big things that I went for this, or any gimbal that I wanted to get had to have that option. Now, a lot of people on YouTube say that this is an all-metal gimbal. Not quite. The arms and that obviously are, but this section here and the handle are a composite material. I suspect that there's obviously alloy inside to make it strong enough, but it's a composite external casing on them. Nothing wrong with that. They actually feel good. In fact, I think it's probably a good thing, because if you're in cold conditions and all the rest, holding a metal handle and all the rest would be probably very uncomfortable. So that's not a problem at all. But I just wanted to point out that there's not an all-metal system like some have been suggesting. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about is just industrial design. When I got the power pack, I was very much impressed. It's actually really, really beautiful design on this thing. You could almost put this on a mantelpiece as a object art. And it's quite surprising that Zhiyun has made so much effort to implement good industrial design in just some of these accessories. That's so well made. It just has this look to it. It actually even feels nice in the hand. Not that the intent is to be holding it by your hand, but it is. It's really, really nice. And to me, that's indicative of what goes into the other components. If you see something like that, and that could just as easily have been just a plastic box, ordinary thing like a couple of battery packs that I have, which is exactly the same concept, then you'd sort of think, well, maybe they didn't go into the detail in the other parts, the main things of the gimbal. But when you see that and the effort that was put into that, I suspect the same effort's gone into this particular component. And even down to the extension arm, rather than just a straight tube with a flange at each end, they've even made the this tube a bit more aesthetic in appearance, with the rounded internal corners, gold button there for the locking pin and things like that. The transmitter that is currently transmitting to the mobile phone, very similar design put into that as well. So there's a lot of niceness in it, which I think is a reflection of what has gone into the gimbal itself. The only thing that I find as a negative is the motors driving the focus and their zoom. The size of the gear on the motors is, in my view, just too small. That in the one for the Fayutech and my Nucleus Nano, they're a much wider, bigger diameter motor, and they're also wider or thickness than what's in this one. And I did have some problems setting them up initially because they're just so small. They just stick outside the housing. I think that particular aspect could have been better designed. I don't know if it's they're just a hangover from earlier products and they just haven't updated it, but I really wish that those particular two motors had been slightly better. It would make the actual implementation on here a lot better. But overall, I'm very, very happy with this particular gimbal. It is a weighty bugger, but that's what you've got to expect. If you're going to carry a lot of weight, you've got to have a product that can support that weight as well. It's the same with tripods or anything else. You can't get away from physics. So anyone who is contemplating wanting a gimbal for a Pocket 4K or 6K, and you've got it rigged out, take note of what I've said, and I think you'll find that the Zhiyun Crane 3S will be a very, very good fit for that camera. Despite what some people have found, I think at the end of the day, if they have a look at it, what they've got, and they sort of do a few changes, I think they'll find it to be a successful setup as what I've got. So I think I've covered pretty much everything about this gimbal now. If I've missed anything that you want to know about, ask a question, I'll do my best to answer it. But until I do some minor changes to this, as I said, that's about it for today. And look, hope to see you again next time round. So cheers.